little bit more than what I previously have for previous presentations. So we got a lot to cover, a lot of things to go over, and yeah, we'll get things started and everybody can kind of trickle in. Let me share my screen here. Beautiful, there's that one. All right. View. Awesome. All right, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I am very excited for this this webinar in particular. This has been kind of a webinar, I guess, not necessarily holding off on or anything like that, but just one that, you know, I've been kind of wanting to put a lot of effort and thought into. And yeah, I'm pretty excited to kind of just share some of my expertise and knowledge in this area. For those of you that are new here, my name is Dan, and my patients affectionately call me Dr. Dan. What I do is I'm a pharmacist by training, but I also do a lot of health coaching and lifestyle coaching and that sort of thing as kind of my other main gig and business. And so I support individuals in not only managing their weight, but living a happier and healthier lifestyle. And so part of some of that is providing these webinars just kind of as information aspects. And obviously as a pharmacist, I would hopefully know a thing or two about medications, kind of getting back to my my original roots, if you will. For tonight's presentation, I've got quite a few slides, as I said, to go through. I'm going to ask that everybody save your questions until the end. And we'll definitely spend some time kind of going through them all, listening to them all, and go from there. So real briefly here, I'm going to move my face around a little bit. Few of my disclosures. As I said, I am the founder of a company called Healthcare Evolution, where we have a team of individuals, coaches, healthcare professionals that ultimately support individuals in managing their weight, their health, and living the healthiest and happiest lifestyle they possibly can. I have a number of contracting, consulting fees with pharmacies, with aesthetics clinics, and that sort of thing throughout the Calgary area. I've received funding in the past for various research projects, and I also sit on an advisory board for the Canadian CPHA board representative for the Pharmacy Examination Board of Canada. And of course, this event is entirely for free, so I haven't received a speaker's fee or anything like that. Drug companies are not currently sponsoring me or anything in this regard, so this is going to be kind of the legit evidence and my opinion in a lot of regards. And if some of you have been following me for a while, you do know I like to express it and kind of give you the real deal, if you will. Few of the learning objectives here. I'm going to do a brief overview, just talking about the brain, obesity, and how this kind of interplays and ultimately really brings about where these weight loss medications are working, they're acting, and the things that we're kind of thinking about as clinicians when we prescribe them and such like that. I'll try to go over some of the most common questions that I've gotten. I obviously won't be able to cover every single question, so you certainly can ask it at the end. But if you ever have, a question that has been answered, you can probably check out one of my social media channels, whether it's YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, whatever. And I have probably answered it there at some point in time. So if we don't get to your question tonight, you definitely can check those out. Everything's at the official Dr. Dan, or my YouTube channel is Dr. Dan-Weight Loss via Habit Mastery. So first things first, we're going to do a little bit of review on kind of obesity and the brain. What we currently know about obesity is that about 70% of it is driven by genetics. So what you get from your mom and dad, fundamentally, it's completely out of your control. What genes get coded, what proteins get made, ultimately makes up you and who you are. A majority of these genes we have found are actually within the brain. A lot of people will think it's your metabolism, it's this, that, and the other thing. But what we've actually found is that, yeah, they are largely centered within the brain in what we call the appetite system, and your weight is essentially determined and regulated via this system. Now, I'm going to kind of give you and tell you a little bit of a story. This is kind of a new idea and actually was originally coined by Dr. David Macklin. He is a family physician, weight management specialist here in Canada. I think he's based in Toronto, I believe. And so what he came up with was this analogy for what we're dealing with when it comes to our brain and managing our weight. So I'm going to tell you a little bit of a story. If you want more details on the story itself, you can go to this link right here, this YouTube channel, and it'll give you all the details on that and kind of tell it nice and succinctly there as well. So first things first, we really are dealing with essentially a collision. So we have this extremely well-developed appetite system and this extremely well-developed motivation reward system that has ultimately kept us alive for 30,000 years. And it was highly effective back in the day when food was scarce, right? Food wasn't around. So we really needed to have the motivation to go chase after a woolly mammoth, to go forage for berries, do whatever we needed to do, and be willing to put in a monumental amount of work in order to eat, survive, find shelter, all of those sorts of things. Now, we have a problem in the sense that we still have that system in place, but yet we have our modern food environment where within a stone's throw away of your house, you likely are going to be able to hit a fast food joint or what have you. Not only that, the food industry has gotten very, very good and has spent billions upon billions of dollars in order to engineer foods to taste as amazing as possible, to make them as quick and easy as possible, and ultimately get you to eat as much of them as possible. In fact, we're starting to show more and more that ultra processed foods are ultimately can fundamentally rewire our brains and our reward circuitry and do all kinds of crazy things. Now, ultra processed foods and stuff like that have had their advantages. I always like to bring up the 1950s, and in particular, when it comes to women that were staying home in the household, they would prepare everything from scratch, spend all day doing it. Processed foods have played a role in allowing women to enter the workforce, to no longer have that role of just staying at home, keeping the home clean, that sort of thing. So there have been some benefits, but there are definitely some downsides to it. Furthermore, our society believes that you're only healthy, worthy, and worth anything if you're skinny. And so we're constantly bombarded by these ideas that society ultimately drives and ultimately will drive and contribute to an individual's weight and patterns and behaviors and that sort of thing. So first up, the 3 layers of the brain. The first one that we call here, and some of you have probably heard of me refer to the primal brain, modern brain. This first part is called the gatekeeper, and it's a homeostatic system. And what that means is that it's constantly taking in information from our environment and keeping everything in balance. So the body always wants to have this balance of not being too hot, not being too cold, being just the right amount of full, not too hungry. It's kind of like a Goldilocks type principle, if you will. So it's constantly trying to keep things in balance. But our gatekeeper or our homeostatic system is primarily there to defend against fat loss. And what it's doing is it's monitoring a hormone called leptin. And leptin is actually produced by our fat cells. So when we lose fat, leptin levels go down. When we gain fat, leptin levels go up. So what the homeostatic system is measuring is, hey, leptin levels are going down. That means we're losing fat. That means that food isn't around. That means I need to sound the alarm to get the body, get the individual to go and find food. Again, losing fat, we didn't lose fat 30,000 years ago to get ready for a wedding or to go be on the beach in Mexico. When we were losing fat 30,000 years ago, it usually meant that food was scarce. That was a problem that affected our survival. So this go-getter is the kind of the first step, and it sounds the alarm to get things started. The go-getter is our motivational system. So we have to have a separate system in the sense that if we just had the gatekeeper, well, it would send the alarm, but there wouldn't be anything really pushing us to go out and find that food. So we need to have this go-getter or this motivational system to get us off our butts and to go and find the food. Now, this is a hedonic system. So humans are fundamentally hedonic beings in the sense that we want everything pleasure and we want to avoid pain at all costs. So our hedonic system ultimately allows us to and motivates us to go and seek out food, pleasure, rewards, and that sort of thing. And it's constantly searching for those things in our environment. And it ultimately learns from these various rewards that it receives that, hey, this pizza tasted really good. It provided me with the nutrients I needed. but it also had fat, pepperoni, cheese, carbs, whatever, and it tasted delicious. So I want to eat that again. What our hedonic or motivational system works on is this concept of wanting. So before you even eat food, before you even really even start thinking about food, you start to get this wanting, which ultimately drives your cravings, desires, and impulses. And the higher that wanting gets, the harder it becomes for you to say resist and not have the apple over the apple pie. So this wanting is being driven by this motivational reward system, and it provides us and allows us to, once we satisfy that wanting, gives us that large amount of pleasure, allows us to learn, that sort of thing. And it really acts like a wave where it rises, it crests, and then it falls once you've achieved or have gotten that wanting. Similarly, if you say restricted yourself and didn't get that wanting, this crest and this fall, you don't get that same satisfaction or that pleasure. So if you really wanted that cookie and you managed to resist it to not have it, your body is almost going to be pissed off. It's going to go completely in the other direction. And you're going to even worsen that cravings and impulses later on. And that ultimately can lead to worse problems down the road in terms of binging and that sort of thing. So, as I said, the wanting is created through learning, because when you're born, you don't know what a pizza tastes like until you taste pizza for the first time. You don't know what sitting on the couch and potato chips are going to taste like until you first have them. So your brain needs to learn what tastes good, what doesn't, what fulfills that want, and ultimately gives it a pleasurable response. And so what we end up having is we have two kind of things in what we call a process of associated learning, where we have the high sugar, salt, fat food plus your environment. And that leads to this associative learning where your environment and everything that's in it is going to be paired and kind of create these cravings and impulses without you even realizing it. So if you're always having chips when you're sitting on the couch, watching TV at night after work, your body or your brain is going to then chunk those things together so that there might not even be any chips in the house and you might not even be thinking about chips. But as soon as you sit down on that couch, start watching TV, it's dark outside, it's after work, your brain is going to start saying, hey, shouldn't we have some chips? The last time we were doing this, we had some chips and those were really good. And suddenly you start getting this craving and impulse for chips. And either A, you hop in your car and you go pick up some chips, or hey, if you've had chips around or whatever like that, maybe they're in the cupboard and suddenly you're getting up, going to the cupboard and grabbing those chips. And so this is all associative learning process that your go-getter brain has ultimately learned, chunked together, and associates all of these patterns and things together. Same thing if you're eating chips out in the public or something like that and not in your usual spot on the couch, your brain is going to be craving that couch environment, sitting, watching TV, and that sort of thing. So it's very, very interesting how the brain will chunk and create these learning type ideas. And a quick thing to note here is that the greater the pleasure that you receive from something, the faster your brain is going to learn, and ultimately the greater the wanting and cravings they're going to be. And so this is where that engineered food, like chips, like cake, all the things that are made to be as delicious as possible, is going to be a bit of a problem in that you're going to learn and associate things more quickly and ultimately drive greater wanting and cravings on the other end. So our big problem here is that the actions of the go-getter and the gatekeeper happen without you even knowing it. There's literally zero control that you have there. And I often call this the primal brain. So this is kind of the part of our brain that has been engineered over the years to essentially keep us alive. Gets us to go out and find that food, to chase that woolly mammoth and what have you. If you look at your dog or other animals in society or in the world, you'll see that, yeah, they're primarily driven by this background sense of things, and they'll go eat, they'll go consume. They're always having and being run by their go-getter and their gatekeeper. So we have no choices being made here. You don't choose that I want to have X or anything. You're just going along with the waves of wanting that you're receiving from this part of the brain. So that's our first two systems, the primal brain. The next part of our brain is what we call the modern brain. And in particular, we call it the sleepy executive. So this is our executive system. This is our prefrontal cortex. This is the modern brain. This is where all of our conscious thoughts and processes and stuff like that, our decisions are made here, your choice to go to work, your choice to learn how to drive a car, basically all of our modern society is because of our executive system. And technically the executive system is also made into two subparts. The first one is the sleepy executive and the second one is the autopilot. So our primal brain, you've learned that pizza, chips, what have you, are really good, really awesome. You're sitting on the couch, it's night, it's after work. Your brain starts to develop that wave of wanting and it pushes it to this executive system. What ends up happening first in the executive system is your autopilot basically starts to generate immediate and automatic thoughts that just come out of nowhere. You don't even realize it. But all of a sudden you start getting what we call permission thoughts, such as it's been a long day. I deserve to have some chips. Oh, well, we fell off the wagon at lunch. So what does it matter? Just eat everything and anything and we'll get back on track tomorrow. Or I exercised today so I can eat more. We've all had these permission thoughts. We have no idea where they come from, but it's coming from this autopilot type mechanism that has received that signal, that wave of wanting from the primal brain, and ultimately generates these thoughts. Now, most of our decisions are made based on these thoughts, whether, humans like to think that we have a lot of control over our thoughts and processes. But the reality is that a lot of our fundamental decisions and choices in a day are driven by very quick, immediate, automatic thoughts from the autopilot system. It takes a lot of work and a lot of skill building, essentially, to work with the autopilot and to recognize and to overcome this aspect. So, and furthermore, as we get into the sleepy executive here, these autopilot permission thoughts can be more cumbersome, especially if your sleepy executive is asleep. So the sleepy executive, if they happen to be awake and turned on and kind of doing what they need to do, they are going to be the ones that ultimately slow things down, allow you to deliberate, weigh the consequences. What is this food actually going to do for me? If I don't go to the gym, what does that actually mean? And it's going to allow you to kind of go through the actual process of thinking about what choice and decision you're going to make. If we have trained and we've done well with our sleepy executive and kept them awake, you're able to realize that the permission thoughts are not correct. And instead, you can create future forward-thinking thoughts, if you will, and saying that, I'm not actually hungry. I'm just bored right now. I don't really need it. Again, I'm bored or I'm just worked up from the workday. Eating this isn't in the direction that I want to go. I'm trying to, manage my weight, trying to be healthier. And so this isn't really aligning with what I want and what I want to do. And so if your sleeping executive can be turned on and being able to do what it needs to do, it can allow you to choose the apple over the apple pie. However, as I always talk about how the modern brain has basically the sleepy executive gets sleepier as the day goes on, if you will. And at the end of the day, it gets quite challenging for that sleepy executive to try and be awake and make that choice of having the apple over the apple pie. And that's often why many people tend to struggle at night, is that they've been resisting this wave of wanting all day long. Come the nighttime, that sleepy executive's really sleepy at that point. And ultimately that wave of wanting, that primal brain gets to do what it wants to do. And that sleepy executive is asleep and doesn't have that control to say, yes, I want to have the apple, or yes, I want to have the apple pie. So this is our only line of defense against the wanting and our autopilot. Now, if we kind of look at the genetic differences and how I said obesity is about 70% genetically conferred, really all of us are going to have differences in basically these three characters. Some people, your gatekeeper is going to be more sensitive. So even a tiny little drop in leptin and fat loss going down, that's going to send an alarm and get those cravings, impulses, and things going for you. Some people are going to have a more active go-getter, or a go-getter that learns more quickly or tries and gets that wave of wanting to be even larger. And ultimately, that's going to affect your sleeping patterns. And for some people, their sleepy executive might be sleepier, might be more awake. It all kind of depends, and it's going to be genetically conferred. So unfortunately, this part and aspects of our brain are largely genetically conferred. Largely, we can't really do anything about them, but we can learn to obviously work with them or we can look at different aspects such as medications and that sort of thing. So obesity definitely is a chronic disease in that it's mostly inherited, centered in our brain, it's influenced by the environment, and it can get worse over time. So when we look at the treatment and managing and mitigating these things, we look at behavioral therapy, medications, and surgery. Just a brief note on behavioral therapy. Really what we're creating here is, this is kind of stuff of like talking to a therapist, working through various different programs, thought processes, that sort of thing. This is kind of where me and my team tend to focus and help people out, is really developing the behavioral therapy, lifestyle skills, and that sort of thing in order to learn how to better keep the sleepy executive awake and ultimately keeping the gatekeeper and the go-getter at bay. There's a number of different strategies and things that you can learn to implement and develop a skill set in order to better manage them. Tonight, though, we're going to talk about the medications primarily and how they help us to manage the gatekeeper, the go-getter, and ultimately make the job of the sleepy executive easier. So if we can dampen the gatekeeper, the go-getter down a little bit, the sleepy executive, even if they are more sleepier than the average person, is going to be able to wake up more easily and have better control on the gatekeeper and the go-getter. So obesity medications. I want to take you on a brief history here because I find it very fascinating where this has gone over the years. But the research has had a number of ups and downs. Many agents that have been brought to market for weight management and weight loss and such like that have been recalled due to causing adverse events and what have you. And also we've had the issue with obesity not being classified as a chronic disease. So without this classification, it makes it more challenging to do the research around it, to get the funding for these medications, coverage by insurance companies, and that sort of thing. Really, as I've already said, our goals will be to help the gatekeeper chill out, reduce the wave of wanting from the go-getter, reduce the number of autopilot thoughts that you have, keep the sleepy executive awake, and possibly something that's kind of being looked at is how can we maybe increase your metabolic rate? So just by existing, you're going to burn more calories. So the first kind of weight loss molecule, I guess you could say, that kind of appeared, started in the 1930s with this product called 2,4-dinitrophenol. And just so you guys are aware, this, if it had one more NO2 coming off of here, it would be TNT, the explosive. So it's very interesting how close those molecules are. But anyways, this dinitrophenol had a number of different problems, but essentially it was called it's what we call a mitochondrial uncoupler. Basically, it disrupts how your body stores and utilizes energy. It makes it a whole lot less efficient. So energy is lost as heat versus being used efficiently. And what I mean by that is that if your car is in neutral and you press on the gas, your car, the engine's going to run, but you're not going to go anywhere. But your engine is going to be throwing off the heat and off the exhaust from that burnt fuel. Whereas if you put your car in gear, suddenly that gas and that energy is going to be burned and it's going to be used to propel your car forward. That's essentially how the metabolic uncoupler works, is that it's putting your body's energy system into neutral. And so all the energy, instead of being used to propel and move your body and do the things that you need to do, it's just putting off heat and ultimately allowing the engine to run, consuming more energy, burning up the gas, and that sort of thing. Now, this drug was never actually approved by health authorities because what happened is that all of this heat that's being thrown off basically led to uncontrolled increases in body temperature. I mean, hundreds of people have likely died from this medication or using this medication because they've been cooked from the inside out. Their body literally overheated. You know, when you get a fever or what have you, we're concerned about the fever getting too high. That's essentially what was happening with these people, is their body temperature, their core temperature got too hot and they got cooked from the inside out and ultimately died. So this drug is now very, very illegal and ultimately was never actually used for commercial purposes. Into the 1960s, all the weight loss drugs that essentially got approved at the time were kind of amphetamine-based or stimulant-based medication. Amphetamines, are known to suppress the appetite. They're, like I said, stimulants, central nervous system stimulants. Phenytoin is one of those molecules, and it's actually still available today, and more to come on that here in a second. The problem with these amphetamine-based stimulants, if you will, is that they can be addictive. So obviously, various stimulants that are, say, methamphetamine and that sort of thing is a street drug, obviously can be very, very addictive in that regard, and they can lead to dangerously high levels of blood pressure or uncontrolled blood pressure issues and problems. Basically, these medications kind of went on, caused some problems, and following them kind of led to a bit of a drought in terms of drought of weight and weight loss medications coming to the market. And that was really until about 1996. And then we've got dexfenfluramine was approved by the FDA. This was basically a stronger version of fenfluramine, appetite suppressant, amphetamine-based, et cetera, et cetera. It worked by decreasing serotonin in the brain. And the fenfluramine was part of the famous combo that some of you might have heard of back in the day called fen-phen. So this was phenetramine and fenfluramine together. Fen-phen was ultimately found to cause damage to heart valves and was pulled from the market. Both fenfluramine and dexfenfluramine were taken from the market, and so fen-phen was no more. But as I said, phenetramine is still on the market, and I will tell you that in a second. Then things got really messy for a few years. A number of drugs came to market, were approved, and then pulled due to various other risk factors and things like that. We had sibutramine, rimonabant, belVQ. I'm butchering all of these names. I went to school for so many years and I still can't pronounce half of the medication names out there. So bear with me in that regard. But essentially all these medications were found to have all of these different issues and problems. And this obviously is going to slow research and drug development. Pharmaceutical companies don't want to produce a drug in this area if it's going to cause issues, lead to lawsuits and things like that. It's a very expensive process on both ends of it. So it's not really worth it. So that's going to slow down the process of drug development and research. As well, a lot of these drugs really weren't all that effective. They were leading to about a 5% weight loss, which is all right. It does confer health benefits, but all of them really were for more of an acute weight loss, so short term. And once you went off of them, they regained the weight. The good news, though, for the kind of the newer 21st century drug development, I guess you could say, is that this really led to very strict safety standards and criteria for a weight loss medication to be brought to market. It has to pass and jump through a number of these different hoops to show that it doesn't cause issues or problems. As well, we made a shift from where there's acute sense of trying to lose weight for the short term and then coming off of the medication to, yeah, we now are dealing with a chronic disease. And so this is something that we need to keep in place for years, possibly for life. And so we started to really put the research into effective agents that were safe for long-term use. Now, when it comes to kind of our goals or what we look at in the studies, the first thing should always be health. And if you're looking at, say, your goal for your journey of whatever it is that you're going on, health should always be your number one priority. If you are not healthy, but yeah, you're losing weight, well, what's exactly the point then, right? We always want to make sure that health is our number one priority and is the number one focus. When it comes to the studies and stuff, the specific aspects or targets that they look at are weight loss of a 5 to 10% from baseline. At this point, we see improvements in heart disease, blood pressure, fatty liver, cancers, diabetes. All the risk of these things seem to go down or correlated with going down. Weight losses of greater than 10% from baseline. We get further improvements in those things, and we can actually start to see remissions in things like diabetes and that sort of thing. However, the more weight loss that we see, the harder and harder it becomes to maintain that weight loss over the long term. And in reality, to be considered a success in terms of weight loss is keeping that weight off for greater than or equal to 5 years. That's kind of our main cutoff. If you're able to keep that weight off for that period of time, yeah, you've essentially entered the full weight maintenance and have been successful in your weight management journey. First up, for the drugs that are currently on the market, these are both going to be primarily in the US, and some of them are not available here in Canada. But this first guy that really got approved for long-term use is called Xenical or Orlistat. Some of you might have taken it. What this drug essentially does is it acts in the GI tract, and it basically blocks enzymes that break down fat and allow fat to be absorbed. So fat, if it's not broken down properly, ultimately can't be absorbed by the body. So it just goes out with your bowel movement. Seems great. You're going to absorb less calories. And yeah, that's kind of how it worked. Overall effectiveness, well, not too bad. I mean, about 5.63% weight loss from baseline compared to placebo group. That's with an exercise, calorie restricted diet, and that sort of thing. So not too bad. The problem with it is really comes down to the side effects. And that's things like flatulence, anal leakage, diarrhea, oily diarrhea, stomach cramps, very unpleasant things. And that is the biggest reason why this drug has really fallen out of favor and is not used today. My experience with it, and that's what I'm going to try to do, is provide you a bit of my experience and anecdotal aspect. I have yet to prescribe this medication. Haven't used it yet. A number of colleagues have, and they've had some successes, but at the same time, most people can't tolerate it because of the side effect aspect of things. And really, it's only recommended kind of not officially, but only recommended kind of non-officially for people who have issues with constipation, because it certainly will help to get things moving for you again. Chiasma, phenetramine, and topiramate. Sorry, again with the names. So this drug is found in the US. It actually isn't found up here in Canada, but this drug itself is made up of two older medications. So I talked about phenetramine, how it was made way back in the 1960s. It fell under the trade name of Apodex. It had a few other names and such like that, but it's one of the oldest weight loss medications that's still on the market. It's usually used by itself for obesity in the short term, as I said. It's a CNS stimulant and it increases your norepinephrine release. And so what we're looking at for stimulants and how you can kind of think of how they ultimately work is when you're walking on the trail, for example, or anytime you did track and field or something back in the day in school, and you get like that stitch that people describe when you're running because you have food in your stomach and it's not being digested because you're running and being active. That's essentially what these stimulants are doing, is that they are shutting down your digestive tract, because your digestive tract in times of danger or activity or what have you isn't necessary for life. Your body wants to focus on putting blood to your lungs, to your muscles, so that you can run away, so you can fight or flight and what have you. And so it slows down the digestive tract and essentially is going to affect your appetite and obviously not make you as hungry. So that's kind of how the stimulant aspect of these drugs work. Topiramate or Topamax is used for seizures, headaches, migraines, alcohol use disorder, obesity, binge eating disorder. Has a huge number of uses, and we actually call it the California drug, and that's because it makes you go stupid and makes you skinny. Sorry to anybody that's from California. But this drug has multiple sites of action. We don't really know all of them and how they work and such like that, but we believe it has something to do with your GABA receptors and increasing dopamine. Dopamine is your feel-good hormone, works in that reward circuitry pathway, and it seems to help decrease appetite. To give you guys a bit of an idea of some of the trials and stuff like that. So two of the main trials that were done were called the Conquer trial, is the first one. And this looked at individuals that had obesity. So they had a BMI greater than 27, and they had 2 or more concurrent obesity related conditions. And so that'd be things like high blood pressure, diabetes, fatty liver, that sort of thing, okay? When they took these drugs, it looks like they got pretty darn impressive results. And this is what we call the completers. So when we talk about completers in a study, these are all the people that officially started the study at day 0 and finished it at the end of the trial. So they were monitored the entire time. And these are the results that they got. Now, the group over here, what we call the intention to treat group of people, these are the ones that maybe fell off somewhere along the way, they had side effects or what have you, and whatever point they were at in terms of their weight loss, that data is then carried forward to the end of the trial as kind of like their data. Now, this usually represents more of a real life kind of situation. So out in the general public, general life issues, people having side effects and that sort of thing. So in reality, the 2 different doses of the phenetramine and topiramate medication really in reality is probably somewhere in that 5 to 10% range at 7.8, 9.8%. Although in perfect conditions, it looks like it's more effective than that. The second trial, called the EQUIP trial, this was kind of an interesting trial, and I can tell what they're trying to do here is, they had individuals that had a BMI greater than 35. So these were individuals that had more severe obesity, if you will. They had a lot more weight to lose. And so whenever we have more weight to lose, and we put you on some kind of treatment, well, you're going to lose more weight. And so that's ultimately going to bias your results and make it look really good in terms of weight loss because your group just had so much more weight to lose. So BMI greater than 35. And as you can see, again, with the two different doses here, whoa, 14% of their weight was lost from baseline all the way down here. But is it really that good, or is it just that they had a heck of a lot more weight to lose? And so it kind of will actually average out and be closer to what that Conquer trial was. But nonetheless, this is kind of the results that might occur in individuals that have a larger amount of weight to lose. Again, the completers showed more impressive results, whereas the intention to treat group, the people who didn't all necessarily finish it, were all lumped together. It really kind of averages out again closer to that 5 to 10% weight loss marker of things, if you will. So as I said, average is about 5 to 10%, depending on what you're looking at and how you interpret that data compared to the placebo. Further studies out there do show less impressive results. Those two graphs were from the actual drug company's website, so they're going to look real good, right? They're only going to put up the bestest of the best data there. Now, problem with the phentermine topiramate, as we kind of already highlighted, is that, there are side effects. Certainly the California drug aspect of topiramate can cause cognitive dysfunction for some people, drowsiness, sedation. There's a huge number of drug interactions that we need to be worried about, as well as things like your blood pressure and mood changes. Now, the fortunate thing about this combination here, the idea is that the combination of the two can kind of have a synergistic effect. So we can hopefully use lower doses of both drugs, avoid the side effects, but get the benefits and have more of that synergistic aspect and effect. So that's really what we're trying to do here. Again, that's kind of that piece of it. I don't have any experience with this drug. I have experience with topiramate separately because we have that available and using it for different conditions and such like that here in Canada. I've heard a number of different stories. Some people, it works like a charm. Some people, it drives them crazy. Other people, they just feel, again, really stupid and do not enjoy it whatsoever. So it really varies person to person on how effective it's going to be, but definitely side effects and drug interactions are going to be the biggest problem. All right, Contrave, one of the more popular agents to the market. Again, this guy is kind of new, but it's made up of two older medications. We have bupropion, or you might know it as Zyban or Wellbutrin. And this is an antidepressant medication. It's used for ADHD, smoking cessation. There's a huge number of different things that we use it for. And it's what we call a norepinephrine and a dopamine reuptake inhibitor. So it increases the levels of norepinephrine and dopamine in the neurotransmitter synapses or within your brain. Naltrexone or Reviva is what we call an opioid antagonist. And in fact, it's used for opioid alcohol dependence and that sort of thing. You've probably heard of naloxone with the opioid crisis. This is kind of like a sister drug. Kinetics are a little bit different. It's more longer acting and that sort of thing, but can be used in the same idea in helping reviving somebody who's having an opioid overdose. Together, they seem to have a synergistic effect in weight loss. Again, they're kind of decreasing your appetite, so decreasing that gatekeeper sensitivity aspect of things. As well, they're decreasing your cravings, so they're reducing that wave of wanting. And ultimately, they might also have a role in decreasing your liking of food. So naltrexone has been found to work at some of what we call your cannabinoid receptors. We call them cannabinoid receptors because cannabis, we found that THC from marijuana and that sort of thing binds to these receptors. So they got named the cannabinoid receptors. And if you've ever used THC or marijuana in any kind of way, you've likely had the munchies. And so that's because of these cannabinoid receptors. It makes you like the food a lot more, and food tastes really amazing when these receptors are being hit. But if this drug blocks those receptors, it's going to decrease your liking of food. So you might eat the cookie still, but it doesn't taste as good. It's not as pleasurable. It's not as enjoyable. Ultimately, that's going to cause less of a learning at the go-getter level of things, decrease that wave of wanting, and ultimately make the job of your sleepy executive a whole lot easier. Now, here's kind of the underlying mechanism. The interesting thing about this drug is we don't really know all that much or exactly what's going on, but this is kind of our running theory right now at the moment. And it looks like it works primarily at the level of the gatekeeper, actually, within the hypothalamus. and ultimately acts to decrease your appetite, increase energy expenditure, and that sort of thing, kind of through a complex interplay of both the bupropion as well as naltrexone and our endogenous opioids, if you say, or if you will, or endorphins that our bodies produce. Now, here's kind of a bit on the effectiveness. When we looked at two 56-week placebo-controlled trials, so they took Contrave, compared it to placebo groups, overall, Contrave led to a 5.2 to about 8.1% weight loss from baseline compared to placebo. So not too bad, again, falling in that 5 to 10% range of things. In this graph right here, we're showing the results of the core BMOD trial. And what essentially happened in this trial is they took placebo group, they took the Contrave group, and they did, calorie restriction, activity, et cetera, and that sort of thing. But they added in intensive behavioral therapy. I think they had like 21 sessions over the 56-week period. And what they actually found is that there was even greater weight loss because of that further intensive behavioral modification. And if you see here, the placebo group even lost about 5%. So they were even starting to get in that 5 to 10% range. And that's what we know the benefits of behavioral therapy certainly can have. And so that's why it's an important component of weight loss journey and that sort of thing. So 9.3 versus 5.1. So again, it's getting closer to that high end of 10%. Problem with the Contrave combination is that you can't take it if you are currently taking opioids because it has naltrexone, which is an opioid antagonist. If you have any previous seizure disorders, kidney issues, blood pressure problems, anything like that, it is going to be contraindicated for you. Side effects that can certainly happen are constipation. This is a big one that I hear about, as well as mood changes. My experience with it, most people seem to have some benefit. It's usually not super great. It's kind of the second go-to one that we'll look at. Some people, like I said, get a benefit. 15% of people, I would say, though, it works like a hot damn. It's like night and day. Their cravings are completely mitigated and managed. They're wanting everything for food is really, really reduced. So it certainly has that potential benefit in that regard for some people, but it's definitely a smaller amount of people, at least what I find in clinical practice. All right, the GLP-1 receptor agonists. So the ones that probably everyone here has probably heard more about. We have Saxenda and we have Wegovy. Saxenda was approved in 2014 and Wegovy was just approved in 2021. There was a huge shortage. I hear the shortage is corrected down in the States. We still don't have it yet here in Canada, and we won't have it probably until the fall of 2022. So stay tuned for that. But it is coming and it is been approved here by Health Canada. So the GLP-1 receptor agonists, really what they do in terms of weight management is they first act at the level of your stomach and slow down how quickly food moves from your stomach to your small intestine. So you feel fuller more quickly and ultimately you eat less. In fact, a lot of people often report that they, often will feel too full or kind of sick to some degree. And so it acts there, but that's what we call a transient side effect. It's going to go away after a period of time. The main effect that it has in terms of weight management is acting in the brain, and it's actually decreasing the wanting from the go-getter. So it's decreasing that food-seeking behavior, that craving for food. And it also helps your gatekeeper to chill out. And that's because GLP-1 is a hormone that's naturally produced by our body, and it naturally gets released from our intestines when we eat food. And it's what we call a satiety hormone. So it's going to go up to the go-getter, it's going to go up to the gatekeeper and tell them to chill out. We've got food coming into the system. Don't need to get all worked up. Don't need to sound the alarm. You can decrease that wanting and that food-seeking behavior, and we can go about our day. Portions get smaller, appetite goes down, people lose weight. Saxenda is a once daily injection, whereas Wegovy is a once weekly injection. And both of these drugs were previously marketed for diabetes, and Saxenda was previously Victoza, Wegovy previously Ozempic. So I'm sure you've heard of those ones as well. And now let's talk about the effectiveness. So they actually did a trial comparing Saxenda versus Wegovy. It was called the Step 8 trial, and it was just published here in January of 2022. This is essentially what they did. Everyone got a lifestyle intervention. Here's kind of the titration schedule that they had between the two. They looked at them for a 68-week period of the various medications and drugs. And here is the overall results with the bluish purple dots here. being semaglutide or Wegovy, and the yellow being liraglutide. What they ultimately got for results is that at the max dose of Saxenda, 3 milligrams a day, led to about a 6.4% weight loss from baseline, whereas Wegovy, we saw about a 15.8% loss from baseline. Further studies have shown similar results. In fact, the STEP 1 trial, which was the main trial that showed Wegovy and its benefits in terms of obesity management, 1/3 of participants actually lost greater than 20% of their weight from baseline. So quickly, to kind of give you guys a perspective of, say, what I mean from baseline is that if you were to take your weight at whatever pound you are, so say you're 200 pounds and you lost 10% from baseline, that's going to be, math now, about 20 pounds. And so 20 pounds down from that 200 is a 10% loss from baseline. So 20% is going to be 40-pound loss, so down to 160. So that's kind of the results that they were seeing in these trials, especially with Wegovy and how effective it is. Problems though, they all have problems. Primarily side effects are going to be GI in nature. Saxenda side effects weren't too bad, I find, in clinical practice as well. Wegovy, Ozempic, pretty much every single person I put on these medications, they experience these side effects to some degree. We can do slow titrations and that sort of thing to mitigate and manage these side effects, but many of the people get some side effect of some kind. So it really depends person to person and how well they tolerate it and that sort of thing. But yeah, the side effects are primarily this GI aspect in nature. But I do find, again, in practice, Wegovy is considerably more effective. Considerably more effective for both weight loss and for managing your blood sugars. The caveat is that, again, more serious side effects. So that's kind of the aspect of it that we're looking at with those guys. My final piece here on anecdotal experiences, if you will, what I find when it comes to basically all of these medications is there's three kinds of people that I'll put on these drugs. There's the responders who throughout their life or at the moment, they might have variable dietary patterns. Weight has not necessarily been a ongoing issue or problem. An ongoing issue or problem for them. It's been a slow and steady kind of through their adult life, maybe when they started having kids or what have you, but it certainly hasn't been a lifelong issue. With these people, we put them on these medications and the weight comes off relatively easily, but it's more of a kind of slower weight loss, steady weight loss, about 1 pound per week. And usually it's pretty sustainable for these people, especially if they stay on the medication, they lose it, they get down to kind of a certain weight and they feel pretty good and get lots of really great results and stuff. We also then have what we call the hyper responders. And what I find with these individuals is that they were ones that were consuming large amounts of calories. So either emotional, late night eating, consuming a lot of processed foods, that sort of thing. They go on these medications and the weight seems to melt off. Like it just comes off pounds upon pounds, like 5 to 10 pounds in a month. Really, it may or may not be sustainable depending on the reasons for their large calorie consumption. So if it was just that, that's all that they had access to, or for other reasons or what have you, or they quickly go back to their old habits, patterns, and behaviors, the weight can easily come back on for them as well. There might be an emotional component there too. And so there's a lot of different factors and things that need to kind of be looked at. But it certainly can be sustainable for some people. Then we have the non-responders, and these are kind of the tough patients to work with. And these tend to be the people that have really struggled with their weight throughout their entire life. They've been yo-yo dieting for years and years and years. They're usually referred to me and they're on an 800 to 1200 calorie a day diet. They have tried every single kind of diet program under the sun. And ultimately they've gained and lost a whole crap ton of weight throughout their body or throughout their life. And they find they get minimal benefit for these medications. They might not find it helps at all. Or they might find that, I have no appetite. I'm eating even less, but I still cannot lose weight. So what the F is going on? And this is kind of a little bit more deeper conversation and kind of some of the running theories that I currently have and seeing what seems to work in helping a lot of these people out. And we'll kind of talk about that during my soapbox run, if you will. So very quickly here, I want to go over some of the common questions. Just go away. As I said, very common questions that I sometimes hear. So number one, do I need to take these medications for life? Most people, yes. As we've already kind of gone over, obesity is a chronic and progressive disease. So it is likely going to be relapsing. Is going to be weight gain as you age due to other factors and physiological changes as we get older in our life. And really what we must focus on is that whatever you do to lose the weight, you got to be able to maintain that long term. And so that's why many of the diets that are often promoted out there often aren't the most effective. And that's because they can't be maintained for the long term. They are non-sustainable. And if we look at a number of the trials, and this is with semaglutide in particular, people were put on the drug for a 20-week period. Everybody was losing weight based on this yellow line here. They then took and split them into two groups. One group continued on with semaglutide or Wegovy, and the other group was switched to a placebo. And as you can see, the group that continued on Wegovy, they continued to lose weight, whereas the group that was switched to the placebo ended up gaining the weight. They didn't necessarily gain the weight back, but they might continue gaining the weight until they get back to 0.0 while being on the placebo if they go for a long enough period. What is the best diet to use while taking these medications? It's going to be whatever diet ultimately works for you. Sustainability and consistency are going to trump everything else. The basic principles that we certainly want to look at here are getting enough protein, eating consistently throughout the day, eating enough calories, again, more on this to follow, and then getting veggies in. These are all kind of areas that I find a lot of people tend to struggle with, and these are definitely areas that we need to optimize before we even get on these medications and while we're on these medications as well, and doing these consistently in order to help you manage your weight in the most effective way possible. Next, are these medications safe? So the short answer is yes. We have a lot of experience with many of them. As I said, phentermine has been around since the 1960s. We've had a couple decades with the GLP-1 receptor agonists now, and many of the side effects that people do experience when on these medications will eventually go away. They're what we call transient in nature. So the GI side effects that occur with Wegovy and Saxenda, for example, those generally will go away after your body gets used to the medication. Some of the long-term ones that people will often hear and are thrown around on the internet: thyroid cancer. There's a black box warning on Ozempic, Wegovy, Saxenda, all the GLP-1 receptor agonists that are out there, specifically a medullary thyroid carcinoma type cancer. So it's a very specific type of thyroid cancer. The reason why this one was flagged is because in animal studies, we saw this situation develop, but we have yet to see it in humans whatsoever. So it hasn't come about yet in that it's causing it in humans at present. Doesn't mean it won't necessarily, but we now have a better idea of some of the mechanisms and stuff like that that are kind of going on. And so far in the data, we haven't seen it occur in humans. So the chance of it is likely very, very low. The black box warning is more for clinicians who don't practice in this area all the time to remember to flag patients and to identify them to kind of make sure that they're not prescribing these drugs for patients that have this history. It's a very rare type of cancer. Papillary thyroid carcinoma, not having a thyroid, all of those conditions are perfectly fine. But of course, follow up with your doctor for that discussion. Pancreatic cancer and pancreatitis. Overall, pancreatitis maybe. Pancreatic cancer, I would say no. And even the new data that just came out is showing that it has more of a neutral effect more than anything else. And actually some data is showing that there might be a protective effect. The other problem with the pancreatic cancer and pancreatitis is that many of the people that are taking these medications also have problems and issues in terms of blood sugars and diabetes can also cause pancreatitis and pancreatic cancer. And ultimately that can lead to issues and concerns in that regard and confound the results, if you will. So is it the diabetes, the blood sugar issue, or is it because of the medication? Either way, if it does lead to pancreatitis, it's very, very rare. And the other one's really nothing concerning long-term at present. Again, one quick note here, health needs to be our number one priority. So if you are experiencing side effects that are not, that are affecting your quality of life in any kind of way or fashion, you need to stop the medication. The weight loss that you might be getting is not worth it affecting your quality of life, your interactions with people, having unbearable GI symptoms and stuff like that. it is just not worth it in the long term. And so, yeah, definitely coming off the medication and finding a different option or solution is definitely going to be a better option for you versus getting stuck in this, having this horrible side effects that are causing issues and such like that, that ruins your life. So always keeping that in mind. Again, health is our priority and the weight is definitely not worth it. Future therapies, I quickly want to touch on this because there is a huge number of drugs that are currently in the pipeline for obesity and weight management. Trizepatide or tirzepatide will probably be the first one that comes to market here. It's currently finishing phase 3 trials. Probably sometime in 2023, we'll see it hit the market in the US, and then shortly thereafter, it'll come to Canada. It is somewhat similar to other GLP-1s, such as Ozempic, Wegovy, and that sort of thing. Again, there's going to be more of an issue with the tolerability aspect of things. Cagrilintide, again, this is a combination of semaglutide or Wegovy plus what's called an amylin analog, which is another satiety hormone. Combination of the two seems to be really quite effective in working together and further reducing your weight and helping you manage appetite and that sort of thing. And then finally, there's this other one that's kind of coming out right now, a muscle wasting prevention drug, but we're starting to see in early trials that we might lose fat mass and gain muscle mass. So that's the ultimate ideal aspect of things. Again, a lot of these drugs are a long ways away from hitting the market, but some of the data is pretty exciting and pretty cool to start watching. Again, we still got to see what the safety aspect of things are and kind of taking it from there. There's other therapies that are out there, but these are kind of the three main ones. Some other early stage research is looking at safe metabolic uncoupling. So finding a medication that can maybe increase our metabolic rate without causing issues like that DNP molecule did of cooking us on the inside out. And then psilocybin, there's a company called Neon Minds Biosciences that is looking at psilocybin, the active component of magic mushrooms, in its management of obesity. Ultimately, what we're trying to do with these medications is to replace bariatric surgery. If we don't have to cut you with a knife, that's going to lower your risk and issues and complications and stuff like that considerably, and ultimately, hopefully lead to better outcomes and more sustainable outcomes. It's really kind of bothering me here. Anyways, on to my soapbox here. So these are a couple of things, and I know there's a few clinicians that are on the call tonight, and I just kind of wanted to bring these up. So this is more for them, but also for you as an individual that might be looking to use these medications. What does this actually look like? And so one aspect of a lot of these trials and stuff like that is that they haven't looked very intensively at eating disorders. And certainly eating disorders are gaining, we're seeing more and more prevalence of them. They're becoming more and more problematic, and they really are something that need to be closer looked at. And in particular, individuals that have obesity often do have a comorbid eating disorder, whether it's bulimia, binge eating disorder, what have you. They're often biased against because, hey, you're living in a larger body. How could you have bulimia? How could you have anorexia? But I see it every single day in my practice. The studies that looked at these drugs didn't really screen, or they did a pretty terrible job of screening for eating disorders. It was more like, have you ever been diagnosed with an eating disorder? Most family physicians don't know how to screen properly for an eating disorder. So yeah, a lot of people were never going to be diagnosed for it unless they got severe enough that they end up in like an eating disorder clinic, for example. So this is definitely something we need to be more mindful of, as putting people on these medications could worsen their eating disorder, lead to a greater failure rate of these medications, and put more blame on the individual and saying, oh, you failed on this medication, you gained the weight back. Well, it's your fault. You were the one who didn't eat properly, didn't do this properly. But if they have an undiagnosed, unmanaged eating disorder, that's obviously going to contribute to that overall process, and is definitely something we need to keep in mind. How low can we go? So this is something that is really starting to be quite concerning to myself. And it's not something that no one at this point in time is really talking about. So no one is really ensuring that patients are getting an adequate amount of nutrition. 1,200 calories a day is not even enough calorie intake in order to sustain a small toddler, right? And if you're consuming that low amount, yeah, these drugs are going to make it easier, but are you providing adequate nutrition so that your body can run optimally? That's a big question right now. And there might be an issue with malnourishment. So I'm hearing and seeing more patients with symptoms such as hair loss, fatigue, low energy, rebound cravings, binging, and weight gain. Many of these symptoms are found in patients that have eating disorders or who have undergone bariatric surgery and are malnourished. So definitely something we want to keep our eyes on and keep being mindful of. Again, going back to screening for eating disorders and various things like that. As well, we have an issue of metabolic adaptation that is ultimately going to potentially limit weight loss success and sustainability. And a brief note on metabolic adaptation, because this is, I think, one of the coolest and one of my favorite topics to currently talk about, is that if you have been yo-yo dieting all of your life, as you can see, this is an individual over time. And we have their weight, their calorie intake, and their metabolic rate. Everything is where it should be. They go on their first diet, lose a bunch of weight, their weight comes down, so does their calorie intake, so does their metabolic rate. Your metabolic rate is going to come down not only because you're living in a smaller body, but also because your body wants to protect the fat that it currently has. And so it's going to reduce that metabolic rate in order to preserve that energy store. Ultimately, the diet you go on, or this individual went on, is not sustainable for them. They end up gaining the weight back because they go back to old patterns and behaviors. Calorie intake is obviously up, but at the same time, their metabolic rate didn't quite get back up to where it was previously, even though their weight is actually higher. Then they reach a point where they're like, oh crap, my weight's up here. I need to go on another diet. They go on another diet, weight, calorie, everything comes back down. And clearly their calorie intake is much, much more restrictive. And as a result, their metabolic rate comes down even further. And again, it's not sustainable. They then gain the weight back because they go back to their old calorie patterns in eating. And even though their calorie intake isn't really much different, their weight goes higher because their metabolic rate never actually quite recovers, okay? And this is the process of metabolic adaptation. And this would be the group of people, what I call the non-responders in terms of these medications. If they have been yo-yo dieting all of their life, their metabolic rate could be much farther down than where it should be. And to give you a further example, if we look at the diet history and calorie needs of 3 women that are the same age, height, and weight, person who's never dieted, to maintain their weight, they can consume 2,400, 2,500 calories a day. A woman that's done her first diet is suddenly down to 2,225 calories a day because she has that metabolic adaptation going on. An individual that has dieted on and off for years, suddenly 2,000 calories, less than 2,000 calories a day in order to maintain their weight because they are so metabolically adapted. There's essentially a 500 calorie a day difference in terms of burning and how many calories this individual over here can eat compared to this individual who has never dieted in their life. That is huge. That's an entire meal difference between two people and ultimately can lead to issues in terms of weight loss, weight management, and make things particularly challenging. Now, the silver lining of all of this is that we used to think when this occurred, this metabolic adaptation aspect of things happened, we used to think it was because of weight loss and that you broke your metabolism or that yo-yo dieting broke your metabolism. But what we have now found is that if we actually slowly increase your calorie intake back up to your maintenance level, so bring it back up to where it should be, we can actually bring your metabolic rate back up to where it should be. So if we go back here, we can bring this individual's metabolic rate back up to where it should be in comparison to the same individual that has never dieted before. So this is something that we'd want to be looking at. Concepts around this are called reverse dieting, diet breaks, what have you. But this is something that we're starting to look at and we're starting to see is that in your weight management journey, we need to actually bring your calories up and have you eat more in order to lose more. So if you go on a diet break, you reverse diet, bring your metabolic rate back up, bring your calorie intake back up, and then you don't need to go in nearly of severe of a calorie restriction. You can then go down to the calorie amount that you were maintaining your weight on previously of 2,000 a day. And because your metabolic rate will be back up to the never dieted side, you'll be able to lose weight. And just to give you guys a quick rundown, some of the stuff that I talk about with adequate nutrition, because I think this is so important. Eat more to lose more, as I said, is extremely vital, not only for the weight loss, weight management aspect of things, but also to make sure that life does not suck, all right? Life's already hard enough. Why make it even harder? Why fight tooth and nail? you want to make sure that you're consuming enough calories and enough food to properly fuel your body so that you can mitigate and manage your day to day and have more energy for all the great things that you want to do. A couple of quick formulas. Now, these are just very rough estimations to kind of get you started, but to figure out kind of a rough calorie intake that you should actually be aiming for, you should be maybe looking at closer to 12 times your goal body weight. So if you're 200 pounds, your goal body weight's 150 pounds, you would take 12 times 150, or I have 12 times 200 would be 2,400 calories a day. Protein intake is going to be 1 times your goal body weight in pounds. Again, 1 times 200 is 200 grams of protein per day. Now, a lot of people are probably going to say that's way too much protein, way too much calories, but I'm going to throw it out there and say, give it a shot. The current 1,200 calorie a day diet that you're currently on isn't working for you. So what do you have to lose by trying to increase your calorie and protein intake? And I can definitely, likely you're going to be living very much a healthier lifestyle. And if you can be consistently plus or minus 100 calories of that amount that you calculate out for yourself, you're likely going to see the scale move. As well, you need to keep in mind more activity, more calories, and you'll need to adjust and continually looking at consistency, sustainability, making tweaks and adjustments, and it's an ongoing process because this is a lifelong journey. Again, if you want more info on this, I go into way more detail on some of my YouTube videos and previous webinars, so definitely go and check those out on my YouTube channel, Dr. Dan-Weight Loss via Habit Mastery. Final notes here, we are almost done, everybody. These medications are safe and effective, and they certainly can change an individual's life. They're used in conjunction with lifestyle interventions. So these drugs are not a magical fix. They're a tool in our toolbox. If you're not looking at getting into a calorie deficit, exercising more and that sort of thing, these drugs are not going to be nearly as effective. Again, health should always be the #1 priority. And calorie deficit is still necessary, but keep in mind adequate nutrition. And if you're having side effects like fatigue, hair loss, and that sort of thing, I'm suspecting these are primarily due to malnutrition issues. Even if you get blood work done and the blood work's coming back normal, I'm finding there's still a level of malnutrition going on there that just isn't being picked up by lab work because your body is very good at what it does and making sure it's keeping you alive. And of course, if we don't provide adequate nutrition, it doesn't matter how much of this medication that you are pumping into the system. Eventually, biology is going to take over and it's going to get you to eat, binge, and overconsume because biology always, always, always wins. So keep that in mind. I think that's pretty much it. For the healthcare providers in the group here, this is kind of a summary slide. You should have gotten the slides, but you can kind of use this, print it off, use it for yourself. It gives you the quick cliff notes on things, dosing, that sort of thing, and all the ins and the outs of the various drugs that we talked about tonight. As well, if you are a medical professional or if you're interested in more of the breakdown on the evidence, this is another project group that I have just recently launched with a couple of partners. It's called Medical Distillery. You can go to the website, medicaldistillery.com. We'll be breaking down more of the science, doing a critical appraisal, really getting into the nitty-gritty of some of the evidence and such like that. For healthcare providers, we're hoping to have educational webinars and stuff like that down the road as well. But go to the website, medicaldistillery.com. You can click on your slide set on the symbol here. It'll take you to the website and sign up for our email list so you don't miss out on any kinds of updates and when we put out a new blog post. Here are the references. There are tons, and there's even more than that. If there's a paper that you're looking for, let me know. Happy to get it for you. Finally, questions. And of course, if you want to connect with me in another way, here is all my handles to the various social media platforms. I'm on the Tik, the Talk, the Gram, the Book, the Tweet, you name it. YouTube is kind of my definite more information source, but certainly you can check me out on my other channels and feel free to ask me questions. I do my best to answer various questions that I get. Sometimes I miss them, but yeah, if you keep kind of hounding me for it and in a polite manner, I'm happy to answer all of these said questions. And of course, we will answer some of your questions now. All right, cool. We got 5 in the Q&A here. So first question, can you take Ozempic and Saxenda together? No, you cannot. They're both GLP-1 receptor agonists. So what's ultimately going to happen is they both act on the same receptor, same pathway. So there's going to be no additional benefit to taking both those medications. They're providing the exact same molecule. They're just, one's a longer half-life, one's a shorter half-life. And if you take them both together, you're just going to have a horrible time with side effects. So no, we definitely cannot take those together. All right, next question. If someone has had weight loss success on 1 milligram of semaglutide, minus 85 pounds over 5 months, and then stop losing plus or minus 1 pound over 4 to 6 weeks, when and how should they increase the meds? There's no real right or wrong answer or how approach to kind of go with it. I mean, the meds might provide some additional benefit. They might not ultimately. Really what we would need to look at is more the case of, optimizing dietary patterns, activity levels, and that sort of thing, and just making sure you're all good there. And then, yeah, certainly if you're getting enough calories, you're eating enough protein and that sort of thing, and maybe you've even taken a diet break or what have you, looking at increasing medications can certainly help in that regard. But yeah, it's going to be totally individualized and really is something that needs to be kind of discussed with your healthcare providers and stuff like that. Always keeping in mind though, the more weight you lose, the slower your weight loss is eventually going to become because you're living in a smaller body and that sort of thing. And yeah, so that's kind of that respect of it, if you will. One. Is there a point where taking a break and restarting semaglutide is helpful if weight loss is stalled? Usually not. I find ultimately we need to look at mitigating and optimizing dietary patterns and stuff like that, and looking at more of this aspect of metabolic adaptation. A lot of people are seeking that slowed gastric emptying aspect, that side effect that eventually goes away. So for some people, that slow gastric emptying causes a lot of nausea, upset stomach, and that sort of thing. And they get really, attached to that because they're eating less because of it. And when that starts to go away, because their body gets used to that medication, everything speeds up again. And ultimately what starts to happen is they no longer have it, and suddenly their hunger and everything like that's come back. But more likely what the problem and the issue here in this regard is that they haven't been feeding themselves enough calories. So they get this rebound hunger and binging that becomes uncontrollable because they've not only lost weight, but they also haven't been eating enough. And so their biology is taking over and is going to push them to overeat and overconsume. So I usually don't recommend stopping the medication because it likely is having some effect there. I would definitely be looking at better optimizing your dietary patterns before I did that. We answered that one live. How do these medications affect sexual drive and libido? What about taking Wegovy and escitalopram or other anxiety and depression meds? So in general, these medications really shouldn't affect sexual functions by any means. A lot of people will report saying, oh, I started taking this medication and I started to develop, erectile dysfunction or what have you. Again, we have a confounding issue in the sense that a lot of individuals that are taking these drugs also have diabetes. Diabetes is very well known to cause issues, especially in men with erectile dysfunction and stuff like that. And so is it the diabetes or is it the drug? It's much more likely it's the diabetes. Furthermore, if you lose some weight, there is some evidence to show it might actually help libido and sexual function and stuff like that. So keeping that aspect of things in mind as well, that might be kind of going on there. So it's not really an easy question to answer, but it shouldn't affect it in a negative sense, if you will. And what about taking Wegovy and escitalopram or other anti-anxiety medications? Yeah, it certainly isn't a problem. You definitely can take them together. There's no interactions or anything. Biggest thing is that whenever you're looking at a weight management journey, you want to make sure that your mental health is taken care of and managed before you jump on a weight management journey and stuff like that. So if you're not optimized from a mental health perspective, then definitely looking at getting that optimized before jumping on these medications. Why are the Wegovy meds injectable? Any movement towards pill form? I have a fear of needles. Let's see if I got a needle here. I don't know if you guys can really see that, but that's the needle right there. It is like super, super tiny. And yeah, you can kind of see it there in the background. So it's a super tiny needle. You usually can't feel it. There is a pill form of Ozempic, but we usually call it the shittier form of Ozempic because it's just not nearly as effective on all fronts. The reason why we're seeing, well, we're actually going to see a real explosion of injectable medications. And that's because these molecules like Ozempic, semaglutide, and all of these drugs that are getting very, very specific targets and affecting hormones and stuff like that in the body are very large, complex molecules. It's not like a tiny little molecule. If you remember that dinitrophenol, where it was just a ring and a couple of guys coming off of it, these molecules are huge in comparison. And so anytime you take a drug orally, it has to go from your GI tract into the bloodstream, through the liver, and this whole process before it even gets to the site that it needs to have an action. And so it becomes very, very, very challenging from a drug effectiveness perspective. And so what ultimately these injectable drugs do is that they're right underneath the skin, it's right into the fat layer, and we bypass all of that. And we get much more of a direct effect. And that's going to mean less drug going into the system, so less side effects. It's also going to mean more drug going into the specific site that it needs to go and having a greater effect ultimately. So we're probably going to see more of the opposite, where we're going to see a lot more injectable medications coming to market. And so if you have a fear of needles at this point in time, yeah, they're going to get better and better, obviously. And it's probably going to be like skin patches or what have you, but definitely finding a way to overcome that fear, because unfortunately, more and more of these medications are going to be injectable forms. And like I said, tiny little needles like this, and they're only going to get smaller. If someone needed to reverse diet but went on Ozempic, now what? I usually recommend trying to slowly increase your calorie intake because you're going to need to anyway. So if you're on Ozempic right now and stable on a dose, slowly try increasing your calorie intake the best that you can. And in particular, making a focus around protein. Lean proteins are obviously the best, but slowly building it up to the best that you can. And ultimately, that's going to slowly get you to where you need to be in terms of your calorie and protein amounts. So working in that regard as well, you can also talk to your clinician about maybe reducing your dose a little bit so that you can get more appetite and that sort of thing. So there's lots of things that you can do in that aspect, in that case of things, but making sure you're working with your care providers. Yeah, you can take them together. Again, how low can we go? I'm not a big fan of stacking medications on top of each other because essentially we're just getting your calorie intake to be so low that we reach a point where it's like, well, are you even eating enough to sustain life anymore? And now we're running into an issue of malnourishment. That's kind of the issue and the problem at this point. So you definitely can, if you are a candidate for it, but keeping that in mind that, yeah, we need to make sure first that you're getting enough calories in food. I've had a gastric bypass surgery, going through a change of life, yo-yo dieter since I was 10. I have severe injury and I am trying to get where I can ride a stationary bike. I've been gaining over the last year. Do you feel I should move forward with seeing if medication for weight loss is for me? I mean, you certainly can. It definitely could potentially help with the overall process and everything that you're doing. Like I said, we definitely want to look at all the lifestyle aspects and what your dietary patterns and stuff like that are, and making sure we get all those aspects optimized. But certainly adding this tool onto your toolbox likely wouldn't hurt either. If you're a type 2 diabetic, is it best to go on Ozempic to help with your blood sugars and assist in weight loss? Already taking Victoza 1.8 milligrams per day. So Victoza is all right. If you were to switch to Ozempic, you likely would get a lot more bang for your buck just because it's more potent, more effective and that sort of thing. So you definitely can look at bumping yourself to Ozempic or asking your doctor to go on Ozempic. How much more benefit you'll get, it's tough to say. It's very variable person to person, but certainly worth the conversation. Can you use Ozempic after having bypass regain? Yes, you definitely can. No problems there. I have lots of patients who actually have had bypass surgery, excuse me, in the past. And yeah, no problems, no issues. Any true medical contraindications to semaglutide for obesity and any drug interactions, example, Synthroid, HRT. So drug interactions, for the most part, there's essentially none. It's essentially a hormone that your body already produces. So that is kind of one benefit of these more advanced hormonal molecules, is that they're better in that sense of things. Contraindications, the only main ones with semaglutide or the GLP-1 receptor agonist is that medullary thyroid carcinoma. So if you've had a history or family history of that, or if you have another condition called multiple endocrine neoplasia 2, that condition can potentially lead to MTC. So those are two conditions that are for sure contraindicated, and I wouldn't put a patient on them. As well, if you have a history of gastroparesis, so you already have a slowed down gastric emptying, might not be ideal to take that medication in that regard. And I've actually held patients back from that medication because it made things worse for them. What's going on with tirzepatide? It's currently in trials right now. They're just finishing, like I said, some phase 3 trials. So they're essentially getting all the data together in order to make submissions to the FDA, Health Canada, and that sort of thing. So it's just going through the drug process or the drug evaluation process as we speak. Can the injection site diminish the side effects? Heard that if not injecting the abdominal area can diminish the GI side effects. In clinical practice, I haven't seen that. It's been reported a lot on various forums and stuff like that, but we haven't seen anything really clinically. I kind of think what's happening there is that people have been injecting in their abdomen, getting lots of side effects, and then they see somewhere, oh, I should inject in my thigh. They go and they inject in their thigh, but at that point, their body is now used to the medication, so they get a diminish in GI side effects and stuff like that. It happens that their body just got used to the medication and they just switched their injection site, and ultimately that led to the actual reduction in GI symptoms versus the actual switching of sites itself. So that's kind of always a confounding thing that I kind of take into account, because I've had patients switch their sites before and they've had severe symptoms and it's brought no benefit whatsoever in clinical practice. So yeah, so you certainly can try it. The drug monograph says that you can inject in your thigh, so no problems. And if it works for you, fantastic. Should you spread protein evenly throughout the day, or can you stack it during meals? I usually recommend spreading it throughout the day. The reason being is that your body can store carbohydrates and it can store fat. Your body cannot store protein. So your body needs pulses of protein throughout the day in order to maintain that lean muscle tissue, which is basically your metabolic rate, or create your metabolic rate. And so really want to maintain that muscle mass, and it's done through pulses of protein throughout the day. So I definitely recommend spreading it through the day. Switch over to the chat box here to see if I get a couple there. Okay, we did the HRT one. I've been on Ozempic since June, only down 40 pounds. Is that on track? Seems slow progress. I noticed inches more of the weight loss on the scale. I mean, it depends on you. There's a number of different factors and stuff like that that really will play into it and have a role in it. Usually we aim for half a pound to a pound per week is like the most ideal. If you have a lot of weight to lose, you're going to lose more quickly. If you have less weight to lose, you're going to lose more slowly. So it really varies person to person. Keeping in mind, this is all a journey, and trying to speed it up and trying to rush it is ultimately going to make it non-sustainable for you. So if things are going nice and steady and you're still seeing progress, fantastic. Keep on where you're going. Optimal injection site. Again, depends on you as an individual. Where's the most optimal one? Like I said, focus. If you're getting side effects, you can try switching it, but whatever's the easiest and most accessible for you. Is a protein shake an effective way to get protein? Yeah, you definitely can. I never recommend adding too many liquids and stuff like that, because they're not as filling. But if you're on the go or have a quick break or something like that, yeah, protein shake can be a great option. Protein bar can also be another option. I usually recommend look up various small protein snacks, recipes, and that sort of thing, and you can kind of find some quick things that you can prepare on a Sunday or whatever, and then have those snacks all good and ready to go. Yeah, whey protein's perfectly fine. No problems, no issues with it if you tolerate it and it does well for you. Common initial reactions when starting Wegovy. Does it feel odd? I wouldn't say odd. I would say the main side effects most people experience are things like nausea, heartburn, constipation, diarrhea. Those are kind of the main ones. Some people do maybe get a headache when they first start out. Really varies person to person. But yeah, no real oddness, I guess you could say. I find people might feel more fatigued and tired, but that's more because, again, they're just not eating enough calories. And when we increase their calorie intake, they're like, oh, I feel a million times better. That's usually what occurs in that sense. So depends on, I guess, what you're kind of thinking odd feels like, I guess. But the GI side effects are the main side effects. If you have Crohn's disease with a resection done that caused short bowel disorder, can you still take Saxenda? I mean, technically, yes, but I would definitely talk to your GI specialist and make sure, there isn't a certain part or a certain aspect or any other kind of history that could be problematic, and keeping that in mind in terms of the resection and to make it as safe as possible for you. Effects of Wegovy on those with IBS-D. Some people, it really helps with the IBS-D or IBS diarrhea based. It kind of slows things down and really helps them out. Other people, it makes it worse. It really varies person to person on the benefits and stuff like that happen. So again, it's not contraindicated. It's not that you can't not take it, but just being mindful, it might not work and it might work great. And it might swing you too far to the other side. So keeping that in mind, following up with your care team and kind of taking it from there. Protein drinks and shakes. So how do you feel about protein shakes and drinks instead of lean protein? I mean, they can be used. They're not ideal for every single meal and every single thing throughout the day by any means. I definitely recommend trying to get as much lean protein sources as you can and using more protein drinks and shakes and bars and stuff like that kind of as snacks more than anything versus actually replacing like a meal or something like that, because the meal comes with all kinds of other nutrients that are so important too. Done. Why does semaglutide seem to have a constipation effect? How does fiber factor in? So all the GLP-1 receptor agonists can lead to constipation, and that's because they're slowing down how quickly food moves through your GI tract. And so, yeah, part of that can be leading to constipation. In particular, if you're not consuming enough fiber, if you're consuming too much fiber, most people are not getting enough fiber in their diet. So that's going to slow things down. Also, when they go on these drugs, people tend to drink less water intake. That's going to slow things down, cause constipation. So keeping all of those things in mind, as they can definitely have a number of factors and roles that play within it. So looking at how you can use fiber to your benefit and making sure you're drinking enough water and staying active can help to mitigate all of those. Again, I have a whole video on constipation on my YouTube channel, which you can check out, which goes into way more detail, but that's kind of why it causes it and how fiber can play a role. Do you recommend Wegovy over Ozempic? I mean, they're technically the same drug. Ozempic was first onto the market for managing diabetes at a dose of 1 milligram once per week. Wegovy is indicated for weight management, obesity management at a dose of 2.4 milligrams once per week. If an individual has had success with Ozempic and we're still looking at weight management, obesity management, then yeah, we switch them to Wegovy. I have a number of patients here in Canada that I've increased their dose of Ozempic. So Ozempic's the only thing we have available in Canada right now. And, I've increased them to say 2 milligrams once a week. So it's 2 separate injections of Ozempic once per week in order to get closer to that Wegovy dosing, because all we have available is Ozempic. So I don't really recommend one over the other. They're the same drug. I do recommend Ozempic if you can tolerate it, or Ozempic or Wegovy if you can tolerate it, over Saxenda, because it is more potent. Any deaths linked to Ozempic or Wegovy? None that I know of right offhand. There certainly wasn't any reported in the main clinical trial. I mean, there's always kind of confounding aspects, but there's nothing that shows Wegovy or Ozempic directly is killing somebody. The drug would never make it to market if that was the case of it. So there isn't any linkage in that. It might be some confounding things that, you don't drink enough, you don't eat enough, certainly could lead to things like kidney failure. So indirectly leading to it. For people who have diabetes and you're on insulin, could cause you to go hypo, and that could lead to problems, but nothing where the drug itself is causing a death by any means. So I think that's all the questions there, everybody. Fantastic. Love them all. Lots of really, really great ones. I kind of powered through them there. Hopefully we got to everybody's. But again, if you have any that come up afterwards, let me know, of course. And yeah, if you have any feedback, feel free to shoot me an email. Always love to touch base and hear from everybody. And of course, if you need any support in your weight management journey or what have you, feel free to reach out. You can book a free consultation with myself and see if you're a good fit for working with my team or not. One more question. You're the best. Great event, Dan. My pleasure, Victoria. Thank you very much. Glad everybody enjoyed it. This will also be posted on the YouTube channel. So if you want to go back and watch it again or what have you, stay tuned. And yeah, you can go and check it out and rewatch it. And it'll be on the Facebook page as well as YouTube. You'll get an email when it's posted, so you can go back and watch it, and feel free to share it and push it out to everybody. But thank you very much, everybody. You all are really fantastic. And I hope everyone has a fantastic evening.